Okay, so we're diving into alcohol withdrawal today.
Okay.
I think this is a topic that a lot of people have, maybe experience with without even realizing it.
Right?
Like, you know how after a night of drinking, even just a few drinks, you might experience some weird sleep, maybe some crazy dreams, or that feeling of being extra on edge the next day.
What's fascinating is that even those seemingly mild reactions are your body's way of signaling that it's dealing with the after effects of alcohol.
Yeah.
It's the very beginning of what we call alcohol withdrawal.
So even if it's just a bit of a rough morning after we're already seeing the early stages of withdrawal, I think a lot of people, myself included, might not realize that.
Absolutely. Alcohol withdrawal exists on a spectrum, and understanding that spectrum is key here. Your brain is incredibly adaptable. When you consume alcohol regularly, even if it doesn't feel regular, your brain starts making adjustments to compensate for alcohol's effects.
It's like our brains are constantly trying to keep things in balance, right?
Exactly. Alcohol is a depressant, which means it slows down brain activity. But your brain likes to be in a state of equilibrium, so it compensates by increasing activity in certain areas to counteract the depressant effects of the alcohol. This adaptation is what we call tolerance.
Which explains why over time you might find yourself needing more and more alcohol to achieve the same feeling you used to get from less. Your brain is playing catch up, trying to maintain that balance.
Precisely. But here's where things get really interesting. When you abruptly stop drinking, after your brain has become so accustomed to this constant state of compensation, it's like pulling the rug out from under it. It's no longer getting that familiar depressant effect, and all those compensatory mechanisms are still in overdrive.
So it's like your brain is a car engine used to running at a certain speed, and you suddenly slam on the brakes. It's going to sputter and cough and maybe even stall out completely.
That's a great analogy. And those sputters and coughs are what manifest as the various symptoms of alcohol withdrawal.
Hmm.
We've already touched on the milder end of the spectrum, things like insomnia, vivid dreams, mood swings.
Which, by the way, those vivid dreams can be wild. I once had this dream after a night out where I was, well, let's just say it involved a lot of flying penguins and a talking pineapple.
Wowfers. It seems our brains get particularly creative during withdrawal.
No kidding. But in all seriousness, as those symptoms escalate, we move into the territory of more severe withdrawal, and that's where things can get a bit scarier, right?
Yes, in severe withdrawal, because the brain is in such a hyperexcited state, we see things like hallucinations, intense confusion, and even seizures.
Seizures. That sounds incredibly serious. Can you give us a better understanding of what that actually looks like for someone going through it?
So in the context of alcohol withdrawal, the most common type of seizure is called a tonic-clonic seizure. You might have heard it called a grand mal seizure in the past. During one of these seizures, the person loses consciousness, their body stiffens, and they experience those often dramatic jerking movements.
Those seizures sound incredibly frightening, not just for the person experiencing them, but also for anyone who might be witnessing it.
They are. And it's crucial to understand that seizures are a major medical emergency. Repeated seizures can even lead to lasting changes in the brain.
Yeah, it really makes you stop and think like, wow, this is serious. This
Yeah.
isn't just, someone being able to power through this. It's like a
Yeah.
real physical dependence.
It is.
And
This is where understanding the science behind it all becomes so important. We're not just dealing with psychological dependence, but actual physical changes in the brain.
yeah.
And those changes require careful management.
So that makes me think then, okay, so what can someone actually do if they're facing alcohol withdrawal?
Right.
It can feel pretty overwhelming, especially in the middle of it.
You're right. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
But the most important thing to remember is that you don't have to go through this alone. Seeking help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength.
I think that's such a critical point,
Yeah.
especially with all the stigma that surrounds addiction.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Recognizing you need support is a huge step. Now, as far as what that support looks like, it can vary depending on the severity of the withdrawal. For some people, outpatient treatment might be an option. This could involve regular checkups with a doctor counseling support groups. It's about having that safety net and professional guidance as your body recalibrates.
And then for those experiencing more severe withdrawal, like we're talking the kind that involves seizures or even delirium tremens, then we're talking about inpatient treatment, right?
Exactly. Inpatient facilities are equipped to handle those more acute stages of withdrawal. They provide 24/7 medical supervision, which can be life-saving.
And I imagine being in that environment too, where you're not, having to navigate it by yourself at home, but you're in a place that's equipped to handle it, that must make a world of difference.
Absolutely. It's about creating the optimal conditions for healing and recovery. Now, within that context of medical care, there are medications that are often used to manage the symptoms of alcohol withdrawal.
Hmm.
We see a few different types mentioned in these articles.
Yeah, benzodiazepines seem to be one that came up a lot. So what's the deal with those?
Benzodiazepines are a class of drugs that act on the brain in a way that actually mimics some of the effects of alcohol, at least in terms of calming down certain brain activities.
So they're not just masking the symptoms, they're actually helping the brain kind of wean off and
Adjusting. Precisely. Remember how we talked about alcohol increasing the activity of GABA in the brain? Well, benzodiazepines do something similar. They enhance the effects of GABA, which helps to reduce anxiety tremors and can even help prevent those potentially dangerous seizures we talked about.
Okay, that makes sense. But I imagine like any medication, we're talking about, careful monitoring side effects, that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why these medications are prescribed and managed by medical professionals. It's not a long-term solution, but rather a bridge to help you through the most acute phase of withdrawal safely.
Right, and it sounds like it's really important to have that conversation with a medical professional because it's not like a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly.
It depends on the individual and their
Exactly.
history, all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And this is especially important when we're talking about what's called polysubstance use or dual diagnosis, which can complicate the withdrawal process.
Okay, so break this down for us. What does that mean?
Of course, polysubstance use simply means someone is using more than one substance.
Got it.
So in this context, it might be someone who is struggling with alcohol addiction, but also using opioids, for example.
Okay.
This adds a whole other layer of complexity to managing withdrawal, because now you're dealing with the brain's response to multiple substances being removed simultaneously. It can be very dangerous and requires specialized care.
And then dual diagnosis, that's when we're talking about someone dealing with a co-occurring mental health condition
Exactly.
alongside the addiction.
So, for example, someone might be struggling with alcohol addiction and also have a diagnosis of depression or anxiety.
And I imagine those mental health conditions are so common that that's probably a lot more common
It's more common than people realize,
than maybe we realize.
and it's crucial to address both. Trying to tackle addiction without addressing the underlying mental health condition is like putting a Band-Aid on a much deeper wound. They're often intertwined, and successful treatment requires a holistic approach.
It's about treating the whole person.
Exactly.
It's their environment, it's their mental health, it's their,
Yes.
support system, all of that. It's kind of amazing when you think about it, right? Like, we've been talking about seizures and hallucinations and like some really intense stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But then there's this whole other side of it where it's like, okay, but the brain can heal.
It is remarkable. Think about it. Your brain, exposed to this substance, adapts to its presence. And then when you remove that substance, it has to adapt all over again.
Yeah.
And again, constantly rewiring, reforging connections, striving for that equilibrium.
Yeah, and I think it was even one of these articles that mentioned, like, literally within hours of that last drink, your brain is already, like,
It's already at work.
starting to try to go back to a normal state.
That's what's so incredible about neuroplasticity, this idea that our brains aren't static. They're dynamic. They change throughout our lives based on our experiences.
Yeah.
And in the case of addiction recovery, that's a really empowering concept.
Because it means that, okay, even if someone has been, struggling with alcohol dependence for a long time,
Right.
it's not like a life sentence. Like,
Yeah.
you can heal from that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And not just to regain balance, but to thrive. The amazing thing about addiction recovery is that it often opens up space for people to make positive changes in other areas of their lives.
Right.
It's like this journey of self-discovery and growth that emerges from a place of, honestly, a lot of difficulty.
And that's something I think we haven't really touched on as much is that, we've talked about the acute withdrawal,
Right.
but then there's that whole like, okay, but it's a journey.
Absolutely.
It doesn't end once those initial symptoms go away.
Not at all. That's just the first step.
Yeah.
The real work, the ongoing process is about maintaining that recovery, about building a life where alcohol is no longer the answer.
Right.
And that looks different for everyone. For some, it might involve therapy support groups, medication. For others, it might be about rediscovering old passions or building new, healthier habits.
It's really about like reclaiming your life in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And while I'm sure that's not always easy, it sounds like it can be an incredibly rewarding process.
It absolutely can be.
Yeah.
It's about stepping into your own power, about recognizing that you are capable of change and growth, even in the face of significant challenges.
Yeah.
And that's a message I think we all need to hear,
Yeah.
whether or not we've personally struggled with addiction.
It's a good reminder, I think, for all of us that, we're all works in progress.
Right.
We all have our
Yeah.
things and our setbacks, and it's really about how we overcome those.
Well said.
So, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive on alcohol withdrawal, we've explored the science, the struggles, the complexities, but what I hope you take away from this is a sense of hope. Hope for healing, hope for change, and the understanding that you don't have to navigate this journey alone. If anything we've discussed has resonated with you, if you're questioning your relationship with alcohol, or if you're concerned about someone you love, please don't hesitate to reach out for help. There are people who care, resources available, and a whole world of possibility waiting on the other side. Until next time, be well.